Okay. So I have another class. Can I sit here? Sorry. Thank you.
Hello, good morning,
Good.
dear researchers. Good morning, dear researchers. Welcome to this session, this class on research ethics class. As you all know, it's important to build our research ethics capacity in order to be able to carry out researches that are grounded in the right ethical concept. This morning, Professor Monica will be starting the first class on of this session. Please put your questions in the chat box, like I mentioned earlier in the WhatsApp group, and to be attended to at the end of the class. Thank you, everyone. Prof, over to you,
Thank
ma'am.
you thank you very much. And thanks everybody that is here. I see that we have quite a few number of persons, hopefully, and others will join. But the smaller the classes, the better, because once we're small, we'll be able to attend to the questions personally. There are two things we'll be doing this morning. I'll present the summary of the discussions we've had over the last 1 week on the WhatsApp. And if there are other issues that needs to be clarified, we will clarify that. And then I'll go on and I highlight the case study for today. Hopefully in an hour, we will be done. Once again, thanks for joining this session. Um, this course, like you noted, is research ethics training. What we'll be focusing on is ethics and looking at insights we gained during the week and recommendations in terms of going forward. We did announce that this is a 4 weeks program, and the focus is to address ethics principle, to address informed consent, and to address research integrity. Ethics principles are things that will guide us as researchers in the design and implementation of our work. Informed consent becomes very critical because this is the only aspect of the entire research process that the study participants have a voice. That is the only point in this whole process that the research participant that is actually central to the production of the results that we need to change the world actually has a say. So it's very important. We're not looking at it today, we'll look at it during the 4 weeks. And a lot has come up on research integrity. The issue of research integrity continues to be a raising concern. I'm sure we will see it popping up throughout the 4 weeks. Throughout the 4 weeks, we'll be having weekly discussions in the group forum. We'll be having case studies, which should drive the weekly discussions. Even during our 1 hour face-to-face meeting, our discussion will be driven by case studies. At the end of each week, you will have quizzes. Okay, so for example, once we're through with this 1 hour session, we shall take you through 5 quizzes and we will give you the appropriate answer for each quiz. Please note that also quizzes will be done if you truly want a certificate, and we had already explained that at the very beginning. There are 4 topics we'll be taking through this training. The first is what we're addressing this week, which is the history of health research, history of health research ethics. Next week, we'll be talking about roles and responsibilities of ethics committee. The week after that is ethical consideration in different research settings. And the final topic for this course is informed consent. One of the things we looked at throughout this week is the ethical principles. There are things that are right, and there are things that promote integrity, but we do know there are only 4 principles. The 4 principles guide everything we do. We can expand the principles. For example, there are lots of discussion around 15 other principles, but they are all hinged on these 4 principles. One of the principles is beneficence. And beneficence implies that all the study we conduct must have social value. There must be a reason. You must be filling a gap. You're not just conducting study because of study's sake, even including studies that are conducted by undergraduate students. We must ensure that what they are doing has social value. There's a benefit. They are filling a gap. Otherwise, we'll be unduly wasting resources, including the time that the person answered the questionnaire, as simple as it is expended for that research, knowing that there's alternative use of every time. So you can't conduct research just to put things on the shelf. You must truly be answering a gap and timely and promptly making that information available to the public such so that it can be used for example appropriately. The second principle we looked at is non-maleficence, which we said in every way you must avoid harm in study designs. You must use the appropriate designs to implement study, and whatever it is in your implementation process, you must address harm. Please note that there's no research conducted that is free of harm. What we only have is minimum risk, low, moderate, and high risk. Low risk being that the research that you're conducting does not expose the study participants to more than the research harm they normally would experience in their day-to-day life. An example I gave is if you look at zebra crossing. If you are conducting a study that looks at the time it takes for old women 60 years and above to cross a zebra crossing. If you do the study in the US or in Europe or any income country, this study would otherwise be a study that the harm is no more than what these people you're studying would have experienced in their normal day-to-day life. If you do that kind of study in Nigeria, it is a very high risk because that exposure is definitely more than normal. In the community where zebra crossing is not known, where traffic laws are not obeyed, where a zebra crossing might just be looked at as painting, where people are driving without a driving license, and even when they have a driving license, it's not as if they did a driving test. Therefore, when you understand this context of harm, you would find that even when you engage in multidisciplinary studies, multi-country studies, the contexting of harm would be context-specific, and therefore you have to make inputs to address the context where you live in. We also looked at the principle of respect for persons. We discussed about issues around informed consenting. The fourth session, we'll be talking about that in detail. But one of the other things we talked about respect for persons is ensuring participants' dignity. We never use people for research. We engage them because collectively, we're answering a question that will improve the health and welfare and well-being of parts of the community to which the study will be generalized. Finally, we also discussed around the fourth principle, which is the principle of justice. For this, we noted appropriately that we must avoid in every way the use of people as a means to an end. So you cannot continuously engage and collect data for people just because you want promotions. One of the examples I give is from my own community, where we do have professors of education. But when you look in the community and the schools that we continuously engage to collect this data, the educational indices of Ile-Ife is not different from the educational indices of other places where they do not host universities or they do not host professors. Therefore, or in effect, what is happening is that Ile-Ife is using people as a means to an end. It's using and collecting data and engaging people in educational activities just to generate professors because they generate data from that piece. However, when you talk of justice, it means you must treat study participants as an end in themselves, which means whatever study you're doing that has social value, you must think about giving back for their betterment. The result that you generate from your study must be given back to the people for their betterment. An example I give is about KEMRI that works in Kenya, because KEMRI has invested very heavily in the study of malaria. You tend to find that KEMRI itself, that is hosting the KEMRI institution, does not, not KEMRI, there's the name of the town that hosts the institution, does not have malaria even when Kenya is known to be a malaria endemic country. But the country will have host institution. There's so much investment that the people are better off because they are hosting the institution and has benefited from the research. So the host community does not have malaria as a problem. All the communities outside Kenya does have malaria. So this is an example of an institution that treats study participants, which is their own community where they normally will recruit participants as a end in themselves. And therefore, when we talk about justice, we talk about promoting equity. One of the things that ways we do this is by giving back to the society by the result we generate from the study. Okay, once the result is generated, it is not about going to America and Japan and China to go and present your results. Present the results to the community themselves in a way that they can use it and improve their welfare. Dissemination of research results is an ethical requirement. It isn't an option. When you write your protocol, ideally you should put there how you plan to disseminate the research results. And disseminating the research results, especially when you're not using the community, but you're treating the community where you generated your data as an end in themselves, means that you should also go back to this community to disseminate the results of your finding. If it wasn't difficult for you to go to this community to recruit study participants, it should not be difficult for you to go back to this community and disseminate results. Other things we also discussed, which is very popular, was the issue of scientific integrity. The need to uphold transparency and honesty. This came forth over and over and over during the week's discussion. We do know that there's a lot of scientific misconduct, and we discussed about the forms of scientific misconduct. We talked about plagiarism, which is a rift. We talked about fabrication and falsification. Fabrication being things that never existed and you just called up, like you have 100 study participants, you recruit 20 and multiply by 5. Okay, it's complete fabrication. Or falsification is you have a data because you know what you want, you then change the information. For example, you want your p-value to be statistical, but you got a 0.0051, and because you want it to be statistically significant, you chose purposefully to drop the 1 and report on the 0.05. So it's rife, actually, when we look at the extent of scientific misconduct, but we find out that many of this is because they're institutionalized practice that people didn't even recognize as misconduct. And therefore, we went on extensively to discuss how to handle the scientific misconduct, and we acknowledge that they have consequences. We do know that scientific misconduct definitely needs training, and that was highlighted in the session. Training, and retraining. It's not a one-off training. This training has to happen over and over and over again. And that way we gradually shift in the way we conduct things and gradually normalize what is appropriate and denormalize the abnormality. We do acknowledge that consequences of scientific misconduct is rampant. And we had a participant acknowledge that in Kano, because of the Trovan study, people do not trust polio vaccination process because it's seen as intrusive and definitely of no benefit to them. And we also remember the Tuskegee study that continuously impacts study participation and recruitment of the Blacks in America up to today. So it has long-term consequences. Even in our localities, we find that a group of researchers might go to a site, do things and promise and, do all kinds of things so that the next set of researchers coming to that study site are not welcome. They are not welcome. The doors are closed to them. So there are consequences of scientific misconduct and there are ways to undo them. We highlighted in that discussion, of course, the prevalence of misconduct, be it plagiarism, falsification, and fabrication. The fact that people don't even know what the terminologies are. And so they can't even recognize and identify that even within themselves and their community, it happens as a problem. But that is one of the things that came up in our discussion. And our discussion also highlighted that these gaps can be addressed by instituting policies in place in these institutions, because when the policies are in place, people can report and people definitely know the consequences, and the consequences are spelled out and the policies are meted objectively to people. So once there is rules and regulation, the risk of scientific misconduct also reduces further in addition to institution training. But we also recognize that there are external pressures that enables things to compromise ethics, especially in supervisor-student relationship, where supervisors pressure students to do the wrong things. And in the absence of a way to report, or where institutions have ways of meeting punishment or punitive measures for misconduct, then people continue to get away with this pressure. Students can look up to their supervisors because of the consequences that result from that. So these are things that happen, or where there's pressure, publish or perish. And in the name of not perishing, you start to do a lot of unethical things to generate the number of manuscripts you need to be able to get you to get promoted. These are some of the challenges that makes this misconduct prevalent. There were recommendations for improvement, one of which is the need to strengthen institutional research integrity frameworks and everyone on the platform. And again, I'm challenging everyone here, make a difference. If all you can do is educate the people around you, it's the beginning of a difference. But more than that, we have to establish institutional frameworks for promoting research integrity. Every university, every academic institution must have a research integrity office. Research integrity office and research integrity officers. These officers then become the people that you can report to. And when there's a research integrity office, including policies, then there will be mechanisms to support corrective measures as well as promote whistleblowing. Whistleblowing allows researchers to report their peers, but their identity will be properly protected. But this has to do with a lot of training and institutional systems and mechanism in place to allow for this protection. Like we also noted in the discussion, integrity requires us to continue to educate our undergraduate students, because this doesn't start now. Even our undergraduate students, where we have people taking thesis, they are already practicing many things wrongly, and nobody's teaching them this. So we have a liability, having taken this 4 weeks course, to do something for a system to make a difference. Finally, we have talked extensively about the responsible use of AI in research. AI is the way to go. AI is the future. AI can be used, should be used. It shouldn't be abused. AI requires that if it's used in supporting your research, and you need to learn tools, and we will be bringing somebody to teach us about what it means to use AI in research. It requires you to ethically disclose its use. If you use it to the methodology to generate graphs, to generate whatever, the right thing is to acknowledge its use. If you used it for whatever form you used it, in your entire methodology, the use and how it was used needs to be disclosed. So one of the things we also noted to address misconduct is the co-creation of research designs with community. We together promote community engagement in research. That way, the things we do definitely will have social value because it is addressing the needs of the population. We also appreciated the need to ensure informed consenting, knowing that consenting processes should align with research complexity. For example, you're doing a complex clinical trial that is going to go on for about 2 or 3 years. Informed consenting cannot be only done at the beginning of the project and that's the end. It means you have to continue to inform them and update them, and if necessary, change protocols and change consenting if things happen. And also ensuring informed consent aligns with participants' need, making sure that, for example, if you're dealing with a person that is low literate, the consenting process is more appropriate for low literate, and that's not where the time you bring 57-page consent to a population of people that cannot read and write. So what this also means is that you reduce research misconduct. It's about transparency and accountability in every single phase of the research, from the very beginning of conceptualizing the process to the very end. But this can only happen with continuous education and understanding of what ethics is and the application of this principle. That way, the way we conceptualize studies tends to evolve. At this note, I'll keep quiet and see if there's any questions, and then we'll go to our case study for this week. Kudush, please, do you have any question in the chat box? Or if there's anyone
Yes,
that has
ma'am.
questions, please ask them for me.
Thank you very
Over.
much, ma'am, for that. Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation, ma'am. We have a question actually from Dr. Madhu. It reads us, one major source of unethical conduct in research is data analysis. Many researchers who have inadequate data analysis skills often engage professional data analysts who often do not have enough understanding of the spirit of the study. Analysts want to turn in output and move on to the next job, so they sometimes manipulate and falsify data in the name of data cleaning and so forth. Researchers tend to simply pass on these unethical outputs. How can this be minimized?
I think,
And
Dr.
there's a
Madu,
second question. I think you take that first.
let's you take it one by one, please. Just raise the question. I think we're small enough to be able to allow Dr. Madu to also contribute, but I think you've raised an excellent question. But one of the things I keep saying is the failure on our part to build competency around these things. The failure on our part to build competency around these things. I am actually currently in an ethics training meeting, and somebody was already writing a manuscript around data that was generated for her, but she didn't know the badness of that data until somebody told her, no, this cannot be right. And then she came to me and I said, no, it can't be right. There's nowhere in biomedics that this kind of data is generated. And she kind of almost panicked. But fortunately, at this meeting, we had about statistician who spent about 3-4 hours with her to redo the analysis. Okay, so she herself did not even recognize the badness of the data she was dealing with to be able to write a manuscript. If she had the competency to, it might be better. So one of the things you would see, which is different in our environment compared to other environments, is the continuous access to education. This is very rare. We rarely, in other places around the world, when I go to high income countries, there are always access to education, continuous access that you cannot but know. It's not, the difference is the level of knowing. You don't know. There's nothing called you don't know. So these are the kind of things I think we ought to, including yourself, Dr. Mato, encourage. And the more I say it, I can't do. Even if you could create a list that the things that we're saying here, you're sending to people in your own network, even if it's 10 people, even if it's 5 people, it's one way to go forward. But the access of people to education in a way that they know that the things they're doing, it's not about just getting out papers there. I'll give an example. I remember a senior person who said he went for a part 2 dissertation result exam, and he looked at the statistics. He knows that it's not possible. With this kind of difference, you cannot get this kind of p-value. And you know that there's a very simple way you can punch and get values. So he called a person and said, look at this, and please help me to analyze. And of course, the things he was saying were significant, were not significant. During the exam, the senior person asked him, did you do this analysis? He said, no, that the one that it looks like significant, he will just put significant. He just of himself, just looked of himself and decided, oh, this one looks significant. Okay, P is equal to 0 point less than, when you write it, you won't put the exam value less than. If I look, can you imagine? Can you imagine? And if he passes that, we got ethics approval, he's going to publish. So you're very right, Dr. Madu, but it's not enough. And this is just one of the many things that you would also have acknowledged is happening in our environment. And we have to find a way to deal with this when we're talking about misconduct. Thank you for raising that. Let's go to the next question, and then we might open up the space for you to also discuss this further, noting that it's a collective to be able to minimize this misconduct. Thank you. Over, Dr. Kudus. Any other question?
Thank you very much, ma'am. Yes. So the next person is Osadolo, and he or she is asking that, please, how can a supervisor PC answers his supervisor when asked why is none of your findings not statistically significant? Does statistically significant makes a study error-free? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Satola. That's also one of my supervisors. Thanks for being here. Actually, you've raised a major concern around people who continue to ship. What is it? They shop for statistical significance. And in shopping for statistical significance, they keep changing their parameters. However, when you do a data analysis for any study, the fundamentals must inform the design of the data analysis. Your data analysis isn't shaped by the desire to find the statistical significance. It's informed by evidence. To say this is the way I'm going to analyze this data to be able to get this data, to get this outcome. So if you don't find the statistical significance, as you otherwise may have noted, it means that's the answer. And that's a very valid answer. So when you do have supervisors who breathe down the neck of a supervisee because their findings are not statistically significant, I think that this is one of the places where you have to be wise and clearly note in a non-confrontational manner about the need to stick with what we have found, especially when your discussion is strong enough to be able to support, your findings. So you can very well validly explain these findings in your discussion session. The problem then becomes challenging when your supervisor now breathes down your neck and says you must make the change. Unfortunately, you will know that reporting that kind of supervisor in our environment is not covered in many institutions by law when there are no regulations around practices and policies around reporting and whistleblowing. Then you're your own. If the pressure from the external, including your supervisor, makes you do the wrong thing, the way you can do the right thing is to ensure that when you publish, you do not report the wrong thing. Please publish what is right. And that one you can stick your neck through because you can do your publication after your work with your supervisor and you can stick with the truth and stick your guns with the truth that you're not going to go, statistical significance shopping. Much more in this day and era, the p-value is not the big deal. It's the confidence interval. 95% confidence interval is the story to tell, and less so the p-value. Thanks for raising that question. Over to you, Dr. Kudus.
Thank you very much, Ma. The last question here is from Oluwakemi Shuwale, and she thanks you and asks that, is it okay to include persons who were not involved in research as part of this author just for the sake of building their publication history?
I'm sure I will open up the space for Oluwakemi Shuwale to answer that question. I'm sure you have an answer to that question and would like to hear your answer to that question. Okay, so once I finish answering the question, please open up Toby, please open up the place for Dr. Oluwakemi Shuwale to please answer the question. Tell us what the answer is and why our answer is that. Thank you very much. Next question.
Okay, how does one distinguish between influencing participant responses by giving too much information about an intervention and giving enough for the participant to give informed consent?
I'm not sure what the question means, but I'll give you my interpretation. If you anywhere in the world, you know how to influence. So if you give people too much information because you purposefully want to influence that decision, you know that. Nobody needs to tell you that you're influencing. When you do informed consent, they require information. It's standard. Informed consent is not, you don't put information in informed consent in a way to skew people's opinion to what you want. No, there are standards. And in Nigeria, if you're in Nigeria, there is a defined standard. Please go to the Health Research Ethics Code. We have a national code and it's accessible on the website. And in that space, there are prescriptions as to what to do in terms of consent and what should be there. Okay, of course, we do know that you can get an informed consent process submitted and you can get an approval and you go on the field and do something wrong. One of the commonest practices that you submit an informed consent form, you get approval, then you go to the field and collect verbal consent rather than a written consent. So ethics practice and what is ethics regulation are two different things in many communities. And one of the reasons why we have to continue to train is to promote ethical practice. Not just doing things that looks like the right thing to do. Okay. And although when you start doing this, you're just a few in the community, but with time it will grow because you continue to project what is right, and yet you're able to get what is right through that process. So in effect, Rakayat, I think my answer to say is that there's no need to distinguish. If you are influencing somebody's response, you know that you're influencing people's response. And I'll tell you one of the incidents, the bad incidents about this. I remember a study which I was engaged with in assessing. Just a minute. Excuse me. Just a minute, please. Excuse me, friends. Thank you. So there was this study where they were doing a microbicide research, and there were 3 different products. One was in red, one was in green, and one was in blue, I think. And in a bid to promote conformity of the study participants to procedure, like they didn't want them to share their products. What they kept telling them in the recruitment process is, oh, this product was given to match your blood. This is a lie. That's not true. And you know what the participants did? They just, when they collect their product, they will just leave the green and blue. And then they will be sharing the red product because the red matches blood. No, red is the color of the blood. Of course, by their own words, they have influenced it in a negative way. They didn't know. We were, external evaluators. After the research had started, of course, the research didn't work. But after the research had ended, when we went back asking questions, that was when we found this out. So when you say things just because you want to influence people and hold information, you're doing it. That's my message, Rukayat. You're doing it. There are objective ways to do informed consent. And if you stick with it, you will get your participants and get things done. Thank you very much. Toby, would you open up the space to...
Thank you very much.
Yes, the person that asked a question, there's a question.
Okay.
Yeah, so let her answer a question. I know I feel, I might be very wrong, that she has a answer. And yeah.
Okay, she just sent in a message actually. Sorry, I'm not able to speak right now. My baby is crying, but my answer would be no. However, this happens a lot, especially if the person is a senior colleague.
Yeah, I feel very comfortable that you know the answer. So I'm not sure why you wanted me to answer. Yeah. Maybe how to make it happen.
Just want to highlight it.
That is a common practice. Excellent. Okay, so yeah. Very well. Thank you, everyone. So let's go to our discussion for today.
We have one hand up, ma.
You have one more? Okay, please go ahead and ask the question.
Okay, so you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prof. Thank you.
Welcome,
I'm emotional. I would have started my question. My questions are in 3 folds. There was a study we carried out, and it has to do with an interview. And at the interview is a research initiated for policy change. And as we interviewed a respondent, he was able to tell us issues around corrupt practices in the ministry, in the government ministry. So we noted that, but by the time we interviewed another participant, he said, well, when he wants to mention about corruption as a major factor, he said this is off record. We noted that. Then by the time we got to another participant, and we were trying to bring these issues of corrupt practices, what he said is we should forget about that and focus on the main issue. So how do we handle this when reporting?
Thank you very much. Yes. Yes, research is about reporting what you find. So you just report what you found. What is your objective? What's your objective exploring corruption? If its objective is exploring corruption, then you raise it. If that is the team that came up, the team is what you found. One said yes, one said no, one said forget about it. That's just all. I mean, there is nothing else to do but to report what you found on the field. This is my own thinking. Yes, it's research. So that's it. You might even dialogue around this disparity in responses to corruption. That might be the big deal about your discussion. Well, I'm not sure there's anything to deal with once you're answering your research question. One of the things I'll just highlight here, one of the things I find when I do focus group discussion and participants are raising issue, I find it has happened to me one or two times when my interviewer now digresses and start asking things about that were not part of the focus of the research. This is about training, I think there was one very highlighting one. There's this lady about sexual and reproductive health and about rape and all that. The inquiry she decided to be following had nothing to do with my research. It just, out of her own curiosity, she just went haywire. Fortunately, I was there and I had to control her. Where are you going with this inquiry? This is gossip. This is not my research. Please focus my research. And I also discouraged her from getting in touch with that participant later because she was only entertaining her own curiosity. So this is part of the training. If your research found 5 people saying different things, it's your finding that you otherwise would report. I hope that helps. Okay, so we do have a few more minutes to go, just about 26 minutes. Let us look at our case study for today. A case study very well highlighted the history of abuse that you found in the slides. One of the things that the slides showed very clearly was that ethics evolved out of a response for abuse. The history of research dated as way back as 1928, 17th century, when SCOBY was discovered. But with time, research became almost like formalized. That was an accidental process, became almost like formalized. And it started an abuse. People started being used. We did read in the slide where people were used to discover if the virus they have discovered for yellow fever is actually the yellow fever. So they induced people at a time when there was no cure for yellow fever. Or people wanted to know fishy things like it happened in the Nazi trials. And they said, oh, well, these are people who are prisoners. Rather than kill them as prisoners, let's use them to generate information, including if injecting them with lethal poisons will kill them. So it is in this regulation, it is in this process of research that the need for regulations happen. And if there's anything you might have identified in our history, is that it is human beings that do the abuse. It's not a demon. It's not a ghost. It's human beings. The second thing is that there are human beings that have training. If you see the researchers involved in the Nazi trial, they were physicians who had taken the Hippocratic oath of harming no person. Look through the entire history, including that I shared for you. The abuses were by sound-minded scientists. They are not crazy. They're not, they're not mad. They are people who, unfortunately, in the chase for data, start to abuse. And we can relate with this in our context. It happens more rampantly than you can ever imagine, that in the name of chasing for your publication, in our community, abuses happen and they repeat themselves. I talk about this in the medical enterprise where I work, where because you are chasing the need for your publication, you now ask your patients to pay for things that don't have to do with their research. For example, I want to look at malaria and chest infection. My patients come from malaria. I recruit them into my study. I now write on them to go and take chest X-ray. Chest X-ray is not a routine part of malaria management. Then they pay for it. Then you tell them to come day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, every day. You don't give them transport reimbursement. Institutional and individual abuse and human rights violation and maltreatment of research participants continue to happen. I would repeat that this happens for a number of reasons. One, the institutional training and retraining of researchers don't happen. So people don't even know that they're abusing. And many times when I raise this up, people justify their actions. Why? They continue to do research with out-of-pocket expenses. They cannot budget appropriately for their research. And therefore, they transfer the cost of their research to study participants. So when you're in a system, when the system cannot support the cost of conducting research, and yet people have to do research in that institution for them to get their promotion, you are breeding a system of abuse. So these are some of the things that we see. So while we're exploring the documentation of historical abuse with a focus on balancing the pursuit for truth, accountability, and harm. So you're trying to find truth. Will this person die if I inject lethal poison? Of course, you're pursuing truth. You want to know if it's yes or no, But in that truth, how well is that pursuit of truth balancing harm and accountability to a system? Accountability to the right of your participants to be human and to have life, health, and well-being. So it's that balance that you as a researcher needs to know and understand how to balance, as well as the role of the ethics committee in being an adjudicator for that balance. So we'll open up the space to respond to the next three questions. One, how do you understand? How does your understanding of the historical context of abuse influence ethical consideration? Two, what ethical responsibility do you as a researcher have in terms of reporting on ethical practice of research, and how will you take this in your context? And then three, what role do research and what roles does research on our study of historical abuse have in preserving the memory of injustice and preventing their recurrence? So please, the space is open to you. If you have responses, please raise up your hand. Toby, who supported us through this process, will unmute your mic and allow you to discuss your point. Over. Please just raise your electronic hand. If you're there, you want to answer any of these questions, and Toby will open up the space for us. Thank you very much. Anyone? Okay, thank you, Dr. Madu. Yes, please, can the mic of Dr. Madu be unmuted, and let him please discuss this?
Okay.
All right.
Please go ahead, Dr. Madu. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I want to attempt the question: how does understanding the historical context of abuse influence ethical considerations? When I read through the historical instances cited, it dawned on me that ethical considerations should be an evolving consideration, an evolving emphasis for research, because what looks alarming to us today looked imperative for those who did them when they did them. Okay, like the Nazi trials, the people they used were already condemned. They were not seen as human beings again. They were already condemned to die. So we can as well use them to find some things, to preserve those who have a right to live. Okay, so
to live.
How does it affect? Yes, how does it affect us today? It tells us that we should continuously interrogate the things we do to find ways to keep on improving the dignity of man, to keep on respecting the sanctity of life and promoting the best for every human being. This non-maleficence and benevolence, I think it should be a continuous evolving consideration. That's my reading of it. Thank you.
I thank you so much, Dr. Maju. I think that's brilliant, extremely brilliant. And I have an example to share on that line. Really brilliant. And I think that's also the place where every context must also have its own experts to continuously interrogate these things and enable and enlighten us. And we do very well know that the context of ethical conduct of research started in the US, and a lot of this is informed by the context in the US. It's only very recently that we're starting to see the African bioethics have a voice and inform and shape the practice of ethics, taking cognizance of our culture. For example, a third-party consent only happened recently. It wasn't there because in those cultures, there's nothing like a third-party consent. Who are you going to go and be asking your husband for permission? Or who are you going to go and ask your chief in the community for permission? It doesn't happen in that context. And ethics initially didn't have that, but now ethics guideline recognizes the place for third party. So there's context. And finally, very recently, one of the major shifts you found in research conduct is also the way things are designed. Because, for example, the ultimate way you do research is what we call randomized clinical trial. Some people would not receive things, some people would receive. But during the Ebola, I think very much, it was Ebola, when we had a lot of research happening in Liberia, Sierra Leone. Liberia is very Americanish. Sierra Leone is very much European in nature because of their colonialism. There was a lot of debate in the face of death from Ebola. You're not saying you're randomizing people to what is a potentially protective product. Where does that happen? Or in a community like Africa, where we are communitarian in our ways of life, where the sacrifice of one is the sacrifice for everyone. Where is it that in the face of death, you're saying one person, part of this community will receive a product and the other won't, that it doesn't match the context? It was out of the Ebola series that the step-by study design became popular. And even right now, doing the Mpox, doing the COVID-19, it is that study design that is being used, wherein you recruit populations that are at risk over time. So stepwise means all of you, we don't divide you into two groups. So if we recruit 100 today, or for the 2 weeks to look at the efficacy of this vaccine, the rest of you become the control. In another 2 weeks, we increase the number from 20 to 40, and the rest of you become control. Then we increase the number to 60. That way, the prospect of all of you benefiting from what is an emergency used authorization drug that has a potential of protection, though we know in research we do not know if it might protect also. It's not. There's cognizance of life. Rather than that, I think that's what I'm saying. We're taking cognizance that people are alive and that your experimentation cannot be inhuman in its design. So yes, once again, I celebrate your response, Dr. Maju, that ethics needs to be evolved. But I also think one of the things we'll push is that we must have people studying about ethics so that the context of ethics we discuss is very sensitive to the evolving evidence in our own climate. I celebrate that discussion, that point. Thank you so much, sir. Any other person? Any other person who wants to contribute to this discussion? Or is there any question in the chat box?
No.
Okay. It's very quiet here. Any other person? Okay, I'll raise a few discussions, and then I would also want to ask if it's comfortable for all of us to shift our time to 8 a.m. Usually we do this training at 8 a.m. 9, that's what we've been doing for history past. But the poster said 11. So we decided that we'll do this first one at 11 to respect what we advertised, but also then at this meeting announced that we'll be shifting to 8 to 9 a.m. because we find that on Saturdays, when you do the first thing in the morning, then the rest of your day is free to do every other thing you want to do, including home cleaning, home shopping, and all the parties that makes our life stress-free. Please go ahead, Professor Shapare. Sophie, please, can you unmute Professor Shakara? Thank you.
I'll ask you to unmute.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good
You're very
morning.
welcome, ma'am. Good morning, ma'am.
Okay. So I just wanted to say that most of the history, okay, well, I'm not sure I've seen anything on plants. We that work with plants, sometimes we feel that there's no abuse. I mean, since we're working with plants and all that. But I was at a meeting recently, and then we're made to understand that whatever we do with the plants has a third-party effect, especially if it's going to be eaten by animals or eaten by human beings and things like that. So the history, I mean, beyond the history, we need to now, look beyond that, just the human beings aspect, to look at other researches that we carry out with plants and animals, and their effect and what their effect will be on human beings at the long run. And then also ethics with regard to plants. When we're looking at biodiversity and then plants going into extinction, rare plants and things like that, how do we collect? Do we collect the samples in the way that they will go into extinction, or do we try to preserve? Those are some of the things that we don't see in history, but with the context of this present the society we're in right now, the condition of our world currently, we need to look at. They are not in the history, but there are things that we need to also begin to pay more attention to. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that brilliant discussion. I think that's one of the things that probably will be sensitive to in our next class. Actually, those documentation around unethical practices beyond the biomedical field exist. It's about capturing it in a way that is properly represented and shared. And I take this as a good. I developed the policy for traditional medicine for Sierra Leone. And that was one of the most powerful things that happened. Our research actually affect the biodiversity of plants and the ecosystem in countries. And unconsciously, this has been destroyed because of unethical conduct. You find people importing plants into an environment, importing seeds, and it destroys the natural. And then things start to happen. And like we're seeing now around One Health and zoonotic infection, without taking cognizance, that is the research. Our research processes that has been taking very little cognizance of the people and the impact on people beyond that. So what I celebrate you for bringing this up, Dr. Shakara. And I think what we've not done well in my country, Nigeria, and even as we that teach bioethics, is start to contextualize authors outside biomedical in the ethical discourse. So even, for example, I definitely know in IFE, that's a new program, the way to go. I definitely know Babcock has instituted this practice excellently well, whether you're in mechanical engineering, finance, social science, architecture, because the piece of work you do indirectly impacts the health and wellness of human beings. Those ethical considerations must definitely be the design and implementation of your research. Thank you once again, Professor Shakara, for noting this. And I see that Emmanuel Effa and Lawrence Adebayo's hands are up. Please Kudus, can the mic of Emmanuel Effa be unmuted? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning, all. So I've been following discussions over time, but it's more like it was always on the biomedical. So at a point I was like, am I in the wrong class or something? When the last speaker now spoke and related to plants, and you've given this explanation, even bringing in other fields of science or endeavor per se, I am now more comfortable in the class. So that was my thank you.
Yes, and I'm going to challenge you, Dr. Apologies, I don't know what the apology is, Emmanuel Effa. We have to start a new process. We must recognize the skewness in the discussion about ethics, research ethics. The skewness is because it was primarily driven from the biomedical angle. What with the context of its application, as Dr. Madu rightly applied, is a lot wider. But what we have not done well is document and capture the ethics beyond the medical in a way that it sinks. I am taking up that challenge, and in my going forward, this is one of the things I'll be seeing and doing in a way that is a lot more reflective. But I am also encouraging us that this is not left to. We as a collective must do this drive to be able to change the field. I know very well many people resist ethics clearance because they can't find the application, like you properly noted, Professor Effa. But it took Professor Shakpare to bring me back to the consciousness that even my teaching here is very biomedically skewed. So let's do this together. And when we get back to the platform, let's start to put this in. And even if the output of our training together is a paper that pushes this drive of research ethics beyond biomedical ethics, I think it's a brilliant way of driving a change in our context. Thank you so much, Emmanuel, for raising that. Lawrence, please go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much for the opportunity given to me to discuss. I was moved by the last but one speaker that talked about plant and traditional medicine. Some of us are actually into plant and traditional medicine to improve on therapeutics that have to do with mental health illness. But so I have an experience in when I was doing my postgraduate study at University of Ibadan, whereby one of my co-supervisor sent us to Shaki to get some data from Babala. We were a team of 3 thereabout, and we went to Shaki. And then we started interview to get data on cancer. And then, of course, the man said something, but he couldn't take us into his, his inner court, but he entertained us at the main sitting room, and then discussed something. He said something that time that this data we are getting, that are we sure? The man didn't want to tell us all the information. They're asking about history of plants and so many things used for cancer, for neurodegenerative disorders, and so many things. But he was not saying that are we sure that hello, can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you. Continue, sir.
Hello.
We can hear you,
all right,
sir.
thank you. So it was not saying that it was saying that how can we use that? Are we not sure that our professors are just using us, are not going to dump us by telling us all this information? When we get all data from them, we not return back with them. We not acknowledge them. We get all those things. So the man, but because of one of my colleague that is a native of that town, and his father is very influential, and because of that, the man was able to tell us few things. But it was bent. I take a lot of persuasion before the man opened up and tell us some few things. But he was saying that we will not return back. The teacher want to use us and thereabout. And actually, after sometimes the person that sent us, I'm just doing master at that time. He got a lot of grant from cancer, and we scheme out of the whole thing. We don't even know again what really happened and the rest of them. So in
thank you so much. Yeah.
How to do things like. Thank you.
Yeah. It's because I have 5 more minutes and we have one more person. But I think, Lawrence, you raised an excellent issue. An excellent issue. And these are things that, once again, it is we that have to address it. It's excellent. And like you've noted, it's rampant. Even you, that it was used until now, they scheme you out and you kept quiet. I'm not saying you should go and fight, but it's like it's a normal thing. And this guy has gone on to get grants. I'm not saying he shouldn't get grants, but the very words that the traditional herbalist was saying came true. That you guys are going to move on and you're going to leave them that gave you the details behind. Who would have gone back to that Babalawo after you and will get information? Because of this research misconduct. Research misconduct identifies the need that you must acknowledge those sources. So tell me who goes back to that man to get information and he will give them. Because even in that research that is being done, Insight of this guy is not acknowledged. Please know there's ethics guiding traditional medical practices. I know because I've been involved. I'm in that space. I'm part of technical working group for traditional medicine practice in Africa. There's ethics guiding this. But nobody's been trained. Just like Professor Shakara said, there's ethics guiding plant use, traditional medicine, the ethics guiding the development of drugs from traditional medicine differs slightly from that of biomedical medicine. But we don't get educated about this. There's so much guidance there. But like I said, it is we. And one of the challenges I give, we can't be on this platform, go through a 4 weeks training, get new insight, and then keep quiet. We can't. We have an ethical obligation to improve the things we do. And please, one of the things I'm going to challenge us is that when we get back to this platform, let's raise this thing. And if groups are formed on this platform that starts to speak up and put this consent into the spaces, a paper, a manuscript, or a discussion around what is the ethics guiding engagement with traditional, information generators, indigent knowledge generation. What is the ethics guiding extraction of information from indigent knowledge, gatekeepers? That's a brilliant piece of work. And once the information is out there, action, policy starts to be shaped around these queries that has been going on. There's misconduct, but there's nothing tangible to be able to hold people accountable to the misconduct. Thank you very much for that brilliant discussion, Mr. Lawrence. And our final participant, Bakis, let's listen to you, and then we'll close for the day. We're just on top of the hour. Yes, please go on. Can you unmute Balkis Izebe?
Balkis, you can go on, please.
No, he's not muted. He's not unmuted. Yes.
Okay,
Please go ahead. Please be very brief.
Okay, yes, ma'am. My question is very similar to Mr. Lawrence.
Just ask the question.
Okay, I wanted to ask me that in cases where students are told by their lecturers to go and conduct researches on locations, when they carry out the researches, and if they don't give the results of the researches to the locations, is that unethical? Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent question. And that will be our last question for the day. Brilliant question. Please note that one of the ethical requirements is dissemination. It is an ethical requirement. It's not like, please read your ethics book. There are many things about ethics requirements, but one of it is dissemination. You are required to disseminate in whatever way you are. But one of the critical, powerful way to disseminate is go back to the community where you collected the information and disseminate that information with them, because they would use that information for changes beyond you going to America and going to conference. And the people where you collected the information from has no idea what you're talking about. And you continue to talk about them all over the world. Japan, you're flying with the information, getting grants. The people that you're generating the information to don't even know what you're talking about. And this has led in many communities, researchers being closed out of their community. There are communities in South Africa. You can't come to come and collect data, except they invite you to come and do research. There are communities in Australia. You can't enter because of this continuous abuse of participants by researchers. Thank you very much. I think this has been a very interesting session. 2 things to note. Please, let's continue this discussion on the platform. Number 2, you would have questions raised in the platform for you to answer, and we'll discuss the answer. And finally, let's make the change. Let the change start from us. There's so much we can do. And I've learned so much listening to you. I am going to change also my slides going forward. But more importantly, let us drive this change, because there's a need to change and broaden the application of ethics in the way that you use guidance. One of the things that came up very powerfully on the platform was that ethics misconduct happens, but institutions to handle this misconducts do not exist. And therefore it becomes very challenging to even do anything about it and much more control it. So have a wonderful week, everyone. And over to you, Kudus. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thank you very much, Ma, for that lecture. So we'll continue the conversation on the